What is up, everybody? It is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, and we're finally officially into the 2025 offseason, and yet there is just more chatter, more drama as it goes with the Cincinnati Bengals, and we will talk about that with one of their star players coming up here, as well as some thoughts on the Super Bowl and looking ahead at a couple of intriguing guys from the draft and free agency that the Bengals could look at to add and bolster their roster. I'm Anthony Cosenza. He is John Sheeran. This is Orange and Black Insider, as I mentioned, brought to you in part by FOCO, the fans-only company. John, what's up, man? How you doing?
Doing well. I'm doing well, man. It is the start of the offseason for all 32 teams, and I imagine like the Eagles and the Chiefs. It was that show Community where Childish Gambino, I forget his actual name, Donald Glover, like walks in with like a pizza, like the whole room is on fire. I imagine that's what the Chiefs and the Eagles are doing, because the Bengals are just lighting themselves on fire with everything that they've been going on for the past 6 weeks. But we've already been talking about the things of the past 6 weeks, during the last 5 weeks of the regular season. So this is like week 15, I guess, of the same offseason talk for the Bengals, even though the offseason officially started. So welcome to the party, Chiefs and Eagles. Glad you be here.
Yeah. And, we'll talk about a little bit of a surprising outcome in the Super Bowl. I mean, I kind of expected a closer game, to be sure. I did think the Eagles were going to pull it out, but I expected a closer one. Eagles with a dominating performance in Super Bowl 59, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. And want to remind folks, if you are new to the program, thank you, and hopefully you subscribe to our show in one of the many ways, whether that's in the Believe in Cincy, BLEAV Cincy podcast channel that has our show 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin, talking football with Bengal Jim and friends, as well as Matt and Willie No Ball with Willie Lutz and the coach Matt Minnick. All of those channels are on the audio side in the Believe, BLEAV in Cincy audio channel. And you can get that through your favorite streamer. Leave us a review there, hopefully a 5-star one if you can. And you have to resubscribe to that if you were on the old feed, our old Cincy Jungle feed. That is now defunct. New episodes will not be downloaded there. You got to go to the Believe in Cincy to get all those shows that you were getting on the previous feed there. So please resubscribe. Leave us a review as well. If you like the YouTube side of things, down underneath John's side of the window bottom, there is a show icon. Click that. Do the subscribe thing, the bell, the thumbs up. All the things that we need to stroke our egos there, do that for us if you would. And of course, you can also get our show and the other shows. They stream on Cincy Jungle's Facebook page as well as on various Twitter accounts. So catch those where you can. Well, John, just when you think the offseason talk and can't pay all the players, how are they going to keep all their guys? What are they going to do? New coaching, staff members on, different spots, primarily the defensive side of the ball. And here we go. One of the Bengals' longtime starters, one of the original draft picks of Zach Taylor's first year coaching the Bengals, Germaine Pratt, who has had many, many big plays for the Cincinnati Bengals. There's been a couple of knocks the past couple of years on him with the downturn of the defense in those years, but reportedly, and I believe it was Tom Pelissero of NFL Network and others have reported that Germaine Pratt has reportedly requested a trade from the Cincinnati Bengals this offseason to go elsewhere. Now he may go see if he can follow his old coach somewhere. It may be another, it may be another destination, but there are a lot of conjectures as to, why and, how this came about. Obviously, one would think contractual numbers is a big thing here, but also, maybe just with the new defensive coordinator looking at players and their performances of late, there was a tough discussion to be had at the end of the season there.
I think for sure. Al Golden was hired almost 2 weeks ago. I mean, I think it was a little over, maybe 3 weeks ago at this point. So you have to think that conversations have been had between him, the personnel department, maybe between him and some players. And you really have to group these players into two different buckets, like young players who, the Bengals can't really move now. Like they just recently invested in them and seen what they can get out of them. And then the older veterans who either are valuable here and will maintain their value here and will have a large role, or older veterans who are near the end of their contracts or near the end of their effective playing days here in Cincinnati. And I think for me, I was curious as to whether or not Pratt would find themselves in either one of those veteran buckets, because Al Golden was his linebackers coach from 2020 to 2021. He had a previous working relationship with him, and I wondered, considering that those were 2 quality years of Pratt's time, those are the first 2 years that he was a starter, and he really started to come along in 2021. You wondered if that prior relationship would be enough to prevent Pratt from being listed amongst other veterans who are likely going to be salary cap casualties. It's very clear, though, based off of this trade request that is again reported. It's not like he himself hasn't officially come out and said, yeah, like I want to be traded. Like this is going through the media. Like his agent put this out there, so that's how that communication process goes. But it seems very clear the conversation had been had between Pratt and either the Bengals or Al or maybe both, and it's went along the lines of, hey, either you're not going to be here at all, or we would like you to be here, but just at a smaller salary cap number or contract number. And it makes sense why Pratt would want to maintain, I believe, a $5.2 million salary for this year, along with some bonuses. So around $6 million in cash that he could get if he was on the Bengals this year. If he were to be released and be treated as a cap casualty, it's very unlikely that I think he's going to be 29 years old this year, coming off of back-to-back down years ever since he got paid. It's very unlikely, I think, that he would see that type of money on the open market. So if he knows that his time in Cincinnati is up and he's not going to be a part of the 2025 Bengals and just the future in general here, it makes sense why he would want to make sure that he keeps that money being on a new team. And the Bengals, I think, absolutely, Anthony, like there's no doubt about it that they should see what they can get for Germaine Pratt if it does seem like he's not going to be on this team in 2025, regardless of whether or not they trade him or not.
Many dynamics at play here. Pratt entering his 7th season, which, you could argue that that's towards the tail end of a productive player's career. You could look at the tackles, and I know there was a tweet that Pratt himself put out. I think it was in response to something about tackles or that sort of thing, missed tackles. And he said, yeah, check the numbers. I can't really remember exactly what the content was, but essentially he was kind of scoffing at the fact of missed tackles. But that has been an issue not only from him, but the Bengals defense in general the past couple of years. That's why we've seen a big downturn in the defensive performance the last couple of years, is in part because of shoddy tackling, right? And that's a few players have been immune to that, and he's one of them. But he has led the team in tackles, and he's had the big play, turnovers in big games. Obviously he had the big interception against the Raiders to net the Bengals their first playoff win in decades. A handful of years ago, he had big plays against the Chiefs. So he's been a very valuable member, but there has been a decrease in performance in some ways over the past couple of years. And then, of course, the other thing at play, I mentioned the potential reunion of his old coach. The Indianapolis Colts barely missed out on the playoffs last year. They were jockeying with the Bengals towards the end of the year, and Lou Anarumo over there now coaching the defense. That might be the spot that seems where there's maybe some logic to where Pratt would go. And then the other thing at play too, John, is, the Bengals love those draft picks. They love to hoard the draft picks, and they have fewer than they have had in a while this year. So, that may be something else to that, shines the light on them and saying, hey, this is kind of where we want to go, a little bit more youth, a little bit more affordability. And then, of course, shaving that money off to what was it? Mid $5 million, I think, is the cap savings. Should he not be here? So, obviously that playing into keeping T. Higgins, extending Jamar Chase, extending Trey Hendrickson, et cetera.
Yeah, it's not just $5 million cap; it's $5 million cash as well, which is kind of where that kind of comes from, right? You would think pay him $5.6 million in cash this year, which is what the team really cares about. You can create cap space in numerous ways, and this would be one of them, but it's mainly about the cash. I did think that what Mr. Whisper said, thank you very much, Mr. Whisper, for the $10 super chat, as always, Mr. Generosity, as we like to call him around here. But I did think he brought up a good point here about how not only, that Golden had that previous relationship with him, and obviously there was that familiarity and what the scheme was at the time when Golden was the linebackers coach and Pratt was kind of ascending as a starter, but also in these past couple of years, if you guys remember, like a couple years ago when Pratt resigned, and I think right before that happened, like he had complaints about not being on the field on third down, not being on the field in passing downs, and not having a lot of coverage snaps, and that seemed to be something that bothered him and maybe hindered his overall value because he didn't really feel like he got the chances to really prove himself in those situations. He was on the field more often in those scenarios in these past 2 years after they paid him like a starting linebacker. And I think that's part of where those struggles kind of originated from, because he was playing out in space a little bit more. He was given more responsibilities. Like you said, Anthony, the missed tackle rate had only increased since he got paid, and his inability in coverage, I think, had been more exposed because he was given more of those opportunities. Yeah. So a lot of what got him to the point where he was worth, $6 million or $6.5 million per year is because of what the Bengals did with him with Al Golden as his linebackers coach, and those years leading up to, that point in his career. And I think they kind of saw the ramifications of maybe putting a little bit too much on his plate. And it didn't take away the positives that he exhibited as a player, but I think you kind of saw how he was a different type of player in these past couple of years compared to when he was first coming up, and how that's definitely had an impact. But honestly, like this situation is very reminiscent of the Joe Mixon situation last year, where the Bengals were expected to release Joe Mixon at the start of free agency. And it seemed like that was about to happen right after they signed Zach Moss. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they traded him to the Houston Texans for a 7th round pick. And the Texans not only took on that contract, but they also extended Joe Mixon and gave him essentially a whole new money, right? So that is probably the best case scenario if you're the Bengals now. If you are 100% on track to moving on from Germaine Pratt, get some feelers out there. No trades can be official until the league year begins on March 12th anyways, but put some feelers out, see what the market is for Pratt. I'm assuming it's going to be a late day 3 pick again, because again, this is a 29-year-old linebacker scheduled to make $5.5 million in cash. If any team wants to part ways with a 6th or a 7th round pick, because the Bengals only have a 6th round pick right now, that would absolutely be the best course of action for the Bengals, but they can only do that if they actually try.
So there are a couple ironies at play here, one of which is like what Mr. Whisper pointed out. It's like, well, you would figure that his old linebacker coach coming back to Cincinnati, that would be the catalyst to a resurgence in performance. Maybe it was just the opposite, another fresh set of eyes coming in and saying, well, no, we got to move it in a different direction. That's I guess that's part of the business side of things here. But here's the other issue, John, is, we can complain about the rise in missed tackle rates. And I mean, Pratt produced even in two kind of down years. The last couple of years, he created turnovers. He had a lot of tackles. He made plays over the years for the Bengals. When we are talking about an offseason where it would seem a lot of the internal financial resources are going to be focused on hopefully their own guys, right, as well as some outside guys, you're looking at rebuilding the defense this year because there were so many issues. Now, regardless of your thoughts about Pratt, his performance the past couple of years, that is a starting spot. You will now need another starting spot. You will now need to replace Akeem Davis-Gaither. I believe he's an impending free agent as well. What happens there at the linebacker spot? Logan Wilson coming off of a season-ending injury. So this now, to me, it's fine if you think you can get that production or even better elsewhere, cheaper, etc. But now you're working with only a handful, like as I mentioned, a smaller amount of draft picks than you have in recent years past. And you're talking about keeping all these other stars on both sides of the ball, as well as retooling the defense in general. It's just another roster hole to fill by moving on here, even if it might be a bit of a necessary move.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I think we can all look at what the linebacker play had been since really Al Golden had left and had taken kind of a downturn. And it is regardless if Pratt is going to be here or not, I think you would still be looking towards the future a little bit at that position where you would be interested in drafting there. When Al Golden was here, they drafted 3 linebackers in 2020, and I think Marcus Bailey's still, kicking it around, I think, the Arizona Cardinals. So it was a pretty successful, effort in terms of rebuilding that group in just one draft class, all with picks outside of the top 60 picks. I think that mindset, no, I'm not going to draft 3 linebackers this year. I'm not going to say that, but I think with Golden back in the picture, because he comes from that linebacker type of background, because he was a coach there for a handful of years, I think the expectation is to get more out of less out of that position group, where maybe they're not looking at a high price free agent at the linebacker. Like that's never going to be their MO anyways. They never really spend too much there. Like I think the Pratt and Wilson extensions are about the most that you could ever expect the Bengals to spend at linebacker. But I wouldn't see this as them getting rid of Germaine Pratt and finding a linebacker just as expensive or even more expensive. I think they would honestly look at towards the younger route and maybe try to find someone who's still kind of ascending as a player, who's still on the younger side, who has a lot to prove. I think that is probably the best course of action because, like you said, they have a bunch of other spots to fill, and that's going to require more money, more resources. I think they're going to put a lot of trust in Al Golden to maximize that position, that whoever is next to Logan Wilson week 1, like he's going to have to play above his pay grade.
Yeah. Those two, for, especially those 21-22 seasons when they were out there healthy together, they were, among the most productive and exciting linebacker duos in the league. And, injuries to both and roster falling apart around them, Jesse Bates going away, DJ Reader going away. I think that kind of hurt both of them. And hopefully Logan Wilson kind of returns back to form himself after an injury, like I mentioned. But Germaine Pratt has reportedly requested a trade. Like you said, John, he has not outright come out to this point and said it himself. But, when there's those rumblings, usually where there's smoke, there's fire. And I think we can be led to believe that this is pretty accurate, and the Bengals will probably have to make a move of some sort with him if he is this disgruntled, be it, a contract renegotiation, release, or trade. Like you said, I think the trade is the best option at this point if there is some sort of dissension to this level, and if there is a willing trade partner to give up something to add to that, the roster of draft picks that the Bengals, the small roster, 6 picks this year of draft picks that the Bengals have this year. So that's one of the rumors. We'll get to one in just a second. And the rumor mill, by the way, is brought to you by FOCO, fans only company. They have a really cool new product out that I think everybody would be interested in. Check this one out, John. I'm going to pull this picture up for folks here. This is a dual bobblehead. This is one of the things that FOCO does. They don't, I think you mentioned it a couple of weeks ago when we had the partnership. This isn't a mass produce kind of stuff where it's just thousands and thousands and thousands of a single product. A lot of their stuff is limited, like this one. They're only making, I think, 75 of this bobblehead, which is a dual bobblehead, Rookie of the Year bobblehead of Carl Pickens and Jamar Chase. See, they call it the Cincinnati Bengals then and now by FOCO, the NFL Rookie of the Year, dual bobblehead with both of them. So for those who have been longtime Bengals fans and remember how great Carl Pickens was despite the sour nature of his departure, but he was great in his own right. Won Rookie of the Year back in 1992, I believe. And then you've got Jamar Chase winning it a few years ago himself. Pretty cool product. Only out of 75. It is open for pre-order now, though, John. So folks can go in there. We'll put the link in the live chats. And it is in the show description, I believe, on YouTube as well. So check that out. Go pre-order. Only 75 of these up for grabs at the time of promotion here.
That's a pretty dope thing. I mean, to win any major award for the Bengals in the 1990s has to count for like 5 major awards. So that just kind of tells you how special Carl Pickens was.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for Jamar Chase, he didn't quite eclipse Pickens's all-time or single-season touchdown record for 17 in 1995. But these two, I think, are going to be linked together in Bengals history. So what better way to kind of commemorate that than with this fine dual bobblehead, which you don't really see that often.
You don't see a dual bobblehead very often. And also, if you do watch or if you get our show through the post on cincyjungle.com, the link is in there as well. So you can check that out. The link was just posted in the live chats too. So go check that out. Thanks to FOCO for partnering with us and go get that. I think you can get 10% off of an order and all kinds of different stuff. So go check that out, and they've got some good products. So check it out. All right. Well, the other rumor mill, we won't spend too much time here. And before we kind of get to Joe Burrow's more of his recent comments after Radio Row, we talked about his comments last week on Radio Row. Your thoughts on the Super Bowl, man? I think the Eagles gave the NFL a very good blueprint on how to build a team, how to win, and how to be dominant in the trenches. That's, my overall impressions. I know we talked about lessons learned a week or two ago, and trenches was a big theme, but I was a bit surprised at the dominating nature that the Eagles won. I thought it would be a close game. I thought it would be kind of high scoring, but man, they just really took it to him, and Mahomes just did not look like Mahomes this week. They did that patented corral plus pressure. They were able to kind of contain him and pressure, and it worked. And their star players stepped up in big ways. Did the Eagle Stars, and there you go. They are the world champions of this year.
So, guys, this is classic Anthony, because I figured that he would come on here to kind of boast his chest, because he's completely right about what happened when we last talked about the Super Bowl, and how he wouldn't be surprised if the Eagles, their talented roster, would be able to snuff out the good things that the Chiefs did. And I was here backing Mahomes like an idiot, thinking that his magic.
No.
I was completely wrong about this Super Bowl. Like, I thought the Chiefs would win a close game. And it's funny how a lot of talk about like Mahomes and Brady, and how like this is like a nail in the coffin or whatever nonsense about Mahomes never catching Brady. But I remember Brady losing 3 Super Bowls, and each Super Bowl had a very similar theme. The Giants under Steve Spagnuolo, mind you, and then the Eagles in 2017, they were able to get to Brady with just 4 rushers, right? That was the kryptonite of how to beat the peak Tom Brady New England Patriots. And what exactly did we see from the Philadelphia Eagles? A completely stacked defensive line. Like the backup defensive line for the Eagles would be better than like 20 of the starting defensive lines everywhere else. That's just how they built it, right? They've just accumulated so many quality players at that position, where they just rotate them in and out. And Milton Williams is getting pressure, even only playing like half the game. Obviously, Jalen Carter's dominating. Jalen Hunt, I believe is his name, it was a complete wrecking ball as a 4th-round rookie. Josh Sweat, in the last game potentially of his Eagles career, they all had phenomenal games against, albeit like that Chiefs offensive line was down the left tackle. It was Joe Tooney who was trying to survive out there. He's never been a left tackle, but he's been really just gutting it out there at a position that's not comfortable for him. But it didn't matter about the health of the interior of the offensive line. It was the clear mismatch, and it looked to be very similar to what Mahomes had to endure a few years ago against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So yeah, man, when you have whether it's the past GOAT or the current GOAT at quarterback, pressuring with 4 is just the key to neutralizing that type of advantage. And then obviously the Eagles just have Pro Bowlers and future Pro Bowlers everywhere else on the roster, and they have just drafted phenomenally. So it was the entire process of how that roster was built together, put on display, and said, hey, anyone can do this, really.
Yeah, and the ageless wonders of Brandon Graham, Lane Johnson. I mean, they just keep playing, right? I mean, they play at high levels, and the Eagles just, know how to win. Now, for a while, the Eagles were a lot of flash and not a lot of substance, and I think that has definitely changed the past few years, particularly because they've made 2 of the last 3 Super Bowls, won this last one, obviously. So they have drafted well. They have made big swing for the fences type of moves for guys like A.J. Brown and Saquon Barkley and all kinds of different players. And, of course, the big correlation that I guess us on the Bengals side of things is trying to make is that they pay their stars. They have paid their stars, their quarterback, their star running back, both of their receivers. They have paid their offensive players and done so well, and then they've been able to kind of build on the defense through savvy draft picks, a pickup like Zach Bond, who had a great year for them, that sort of thing. So they have laid out a blueprint on how to build a championship team. I mean, the Chiefs have as well. Just because they lost doesn't mean that they have that they haven't. But that has traditionally been a bit more of a quarterback reliant type of program quarterback coach type of program, reliant program in Kansas City than it is in Eagles, which is and it's not a knock on Hurts or Sirianni, but they have a great roster, and that was noted by Joe Burrow on the Barstool Sports program. What is it? Pardon my interruption, or pardon my take. Pardon my interruption is the ESPN program. With the great PFT commenter, he's hilarious on that. But regardless, he went on there and something to the effect of, well, what was it, John? The Eagles kind of showed us the way, right? Was something to the effect of the quote that Burrow put on that program?
It was done masterfully, because this interview was recorded, I believe, a week ago as we're recording this. So Burrow was in the middle of his rounds at Radio Row. And one of the things that I said was that he's going to be asked by every program about restructuring his contract and how are the Bengals going to pay these guys. And part of my take has had Burrow on multiple times. And I believe that they are the best program in terms of getting quality stuff out of Burrow in front of a mic, because that's not where he likes to be, right? They just treat him like a normal dude. They treat him like a chill dude, like he is. And that's how they get the best content. And of course, I think it was Big Cat who asked him not about like all of that, but he basically asked him to explain what a contract restructure was. And that led to a very interesting conversation about the salary cap in general. And then it got Burrow to basically say, well, some teams kind of treat the salary cap like it doesn't exist, because they were talking about, like the cap doesn't exist, which is, a common thing that a lot of NFL fans say. So they were trying to play like the relatable card. And then Burrow just basically said like the Eagles they seem to be paying everyone. So that seems like the way, which is by far the most interesting thing that Burrow has said about this topic, I think, because it's him flat out saying he recognizes how other teams manage the cap, are flexible with the cap, manipulate the salary cap. And he realizes that the Bengals are the complete opposite in that sense. And if the Eagles can not only pay all these guys, but get out in front, like they paid Jalen Hurts before Burrow and Herbert and Lamar Jackson. They paid Devontae Smith very early in last offseason and got him on a relatively cheap deal too. Not only do the Eagles manage to keep these immediate cap hits low by putting a lot of guaranteed money into the contracts and putting a lot of the cash in the later parts of these deals, but they also do it, and they're just ahead of the times where they don't have to wait around and like see those prices get inflated, which is exactly what the Bengals are dealing with now. So it was very interesting to basically have it be confirmed that Burrow knows that what the Bengals are doing is not optimal for business. And he was literally proven right as the Eagles just won the Super Bowl because of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's great to be the innovator. It's great to be the originator. It's great to be the person that sets the blueprint, and you get respect for that. And I'm not saying, plagiarize or anything like that, obviously. I mean, I'm going to put that disclaimer out. But, what is it? Mimicry is the most sincerest form of flattery, or something to that effect. I mean, it's there. What the Eagles have done is there. What they have put out in their contracts to their stars is there. If you're the Bengals, you don't have to be the person on the forefront, but you may want to be a little bit ahead of the curve and look at that and say, we have a very similar set of core players that we need to keep and pay right now. And you have arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL on your roster. You have a top 2 to top 3 quarterback that you did pay on your roster. You have a top 3 defensive player, top 5 defensive player in the NFL on your team that is looking for a contract extension. And then, of course, you have another top receiver that would be a number 1 or just, a star player on most any other team who I think wants to be in Cincinnati. So all of that is kind of like, man, that it was summed up in a very 10-second answer very well by Joe Burrow on this program. The other thing too that he mentioned, which was like they were talking about the salary cap, and they're like, I mean, you know how it works, right? And he's like, well, kinda. I mean, it was like he's like, well, yeah, I mean, I know a bit about it. Basically, also just, I mean, it's a very basic way of saying that isn't my job. My job is not managing the cap or managing the contracts. I have to know a bit about that as I go to management to say, keep this guy. We need to keep these guys around, pay them. But that's his deal isn't book management. His deal is getting wins and postseason wins. And I just thought that was a pretty funny little way of saying that. Just like, oh, kinda.
And like everyone is taking notice of this. Like you have national accounts who are recognizing that, it's the middle of February. Like Joe Burrow, someone of his caliber, should be at home just relaxing or in Tulum just vacationing. And then he's going on Radio Row talking about how he's on overthecap.com and like, doing all these projections and referencing like the COVID money is about to come in these next couple of years. So the cap is going to continue to rise up and rise up. He's doing essentially what we should be doing, but he's the quarterback of the Bengals and he's now facilitating all this information. Everyone recognizes that he is in a completely unique position where he shouldn't have to be. But this is where he is because he's the only one who can put actual public pressure on the Bengals. And we still don't know if that pressure is actually going to mean anything.
Well, it's public, team-friendly pressure, right? Sure. I mean, he's not raking anybody over the coals or saying, I can't believe this or anything like that. But all of these guys, we talked about this last week, all of these guys have just kind of said, here, Bengals, this is it. I mean, this is we want to be. Guys are saying we want to be here, and they've some of these players have gone on Radio Row and just kind of said, basically the ball's in the Bengals' court. They probably know what a lot of these players want and or are looking for, so they got to step up to the plate.
100%. Like it's been this for 2 months now, and you have obviously major deadlines coming up in the coming weeks, and there's nothing more that he himself can do. There's not going to be another platform for him to speak on this. It's all out there and everyone knows it at this point. So the goal I think was accomplished of putting the onus on the team to actually get this stuff done. And now it's going to be a bunch of conversations behind closed doors. And you're already seeing reports from national people saying like, oh, like the Bengals only have X amount in cap space. And now this is going to be really hard. And where that information is coming from. It's coming straight from the team. And then all this information from the players, like that's been very open. So it's just this back and forth posturing that we're also very accustomed to. But again, all that matters now is how these conversations now go behind closed doors. And if they can actually get the stuff done before they spend the other money in actual free agency.
I remember so many years, particularly in the lean outside free agent years of Marvin Lewis, where poor old Jeff Hobson had to relay the rookie pool and lean on the rookie pool. And gosh, I hope we just never get back to those days again. But anyway, some more interesting comments from Joe Burrow. And like you said, just as nice as polite of pressure as possible has been placed on the Cincinnati Bengals from their stars to get these deals done. And quite honestly, I really hope that they do, because there is a lot of people slamming them right now. There's a lot of people, saying, the poverty franchise, this is criminal what they're doing to Joe Burrow. I would just love for them to shut people up. But unfortunately, there's not a ton of precedence of this team doing that. So hopefully they change their ways this offseason and have a hyper aggressive offseason and take note of both the Super Bowl teams, particularly the Eagles, and how they've constructed things. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We have a prospect profile and a free agency profile we're going to get to towards the tail end of the show as we start not wrapping things up quite yet, but towards the tail end of the show here, back half of the show. I'm Anthony, he's John, and this is brought to you in part by FOCO, the fans only company. Get your Carl Pickens and Jamar Chase bobblehead through the link in our chat, as well as in the show descriptions there. Check that out. Only 75, I think, are being distributed as of this point. So limited edition. What do you want to start with, John? You want to do free agency or do you want to do the draft? Should we go in chronological order or should we, what are you thinking? Okay. All right, let's go chronologically. So I went a tiny bit of low-hanging fruit here for both of these. Hey, we're ramping it up, right? These are names that people will know, but for the free agency and the draft. But this is one I think very intriguing. This was one that was kicked around a little bit around last season and just kind of different scenarios. We're going to talk about Chase Young. He has a void year here in New Orleans, and a guy that's never really peaked beyond 7.5 sacks as a player. He did make the Pro Bowl as a rookie. When he did have 7.5 sacks, was the defensive player of the year, but has just never lived up to the hype. Still a productive guy, and may just be kind of one of those Jadeveon Clowney guys, right? Where you just rent him for a year, 2 years, and then they give you a little bit, and then they go on and they just kind of keep going to different teams. He's now, same draft class as Joe Burrow, so entering his 6th season, and I believe he's been on 2 different teams, I think, to this point.
3.
So 3, yes. So again, a guy a lot of people would like to see here as a support player, which sounds weird from a former number 2 pick overall. Sounds weird to say he'd be a support guy, but obviously I think if you have him in here, if there are questions to with Trey Hendricks or Sam Hubbard going on this year, maybe this is a route that you explore if you are the Cincinnati Bengals. And here's a little bit on him. Obviously, a guy that a lot of people are just familiar with from his Ohio State days. I don't know, John. I mean, you look at the numbers aren't eye-popping here when you look at the stats over 5 years, and there's been injuries, 22 sacks, 131 total tackles, 28 total tackles for loss, 53 quarterback hits. That's a pretty good ratio to the sack number there. PFF score overall of 66.4. So nothing outstanding, but a guy I think could be a steady veteran presence. You're looking for somebody to come in there and give you some form of an ancillary pass rush. If you are able to get some sort of bargain bin deal for a guy like this on your line where you have questions about Sam Hubbard, God love him. We love him on this show. He's been great to us, but getting towards the tail end of his career, he's had a lot of injuries himself. When is Joseph Ossai going to ever, if ever, hit his potential, and others on this roster? I mean, I don't know, man. I kind of feel like this could be, if the value is there for the Bengals in a team-friendly deal, I know it's low-hanging fruit, but this could be a guy they could explore maybe on a shorter-term deal just to see what they can get out of him for a year.
It is fascinating that he's played a ton of football, over 3,000 career snaps, and he's not even 26 yet. He's going to be 26 in April, but he was really young coming into the NFL. And, he was very clearly like a slam dunk top 5 pick coming out of Ohio State. They had a reputation with Joey Bosa and other guys along the defensive line. So it made a lot of sense for where that pedigree came from. And it was really just injuries, I think, that really deterred his career and kind of made it not so impressive when he started off with Washington. Then he got traded to the 49ers in the middle of the 2023 season, but then he signed a 1-year prove-it deal last year. And I think what he did with the Saints this past season, and there's an interesting connection that I'll get to in a minute, I think that's what is going to make him some money this time around, because it was like the first time in a couple of years where he was fully healthy. He wasn't a starter, I don't think technically. I think he was listed as like a rotational guy still, but he played a ton of snaps. And he was a productive pass rusher. Brandon Thorne, who is one of the go-to trench film guys just anywhere, he had him, I think, in the top 15 in terms of like high-quality pass rush win rate, even higher than Trey Hendrickson in that regard. So he had a really underrated 2024 campaign, and had a great time too, because he's entering like a contract year for the first time. So how much he's projected to make, I think, is very interesting. PFF has him projected at $17.5 million a year, which is more than what the Bengals signed for Trey Hendrickson a few years ago. But obviously, if you counter it into inflation, it's still below, like, obviously that tier 1, maybe even tier 2 pass rusher. But that's the nature of the NFL, right? Like, these are the guys that get paid more than pretty much anyone on the defensive side of the ball. And I think the fact that he's still young and he's coming off of a quality year, I think that's what's going to get him some type of a market like that. Probably not looking more than anything than a 2 or 3 year deal, because of the lack of consistent success in his health in that regard. But I think the Bengals are an interesting fit because they just hired a former Saints assistant in Mike Hodges at linebackers coach. So he didn't coach him directly, but there's some familiarity, at least being in the same building with him. I guess the biggest question I have, Anthony, is the fact that obviously Trey is going to be here for at least 1 more year, and the plan is to have him for longer. But Chase Young was mainly a right defensive end for the Saints this past year, and he hasn't really played left defensive end in a couple of years. And that was, I think, a concern that I think a lot of us had with Myles Murphy coming out of Clemson, because he was mainly a right defensive end. So they have snaps to fill at the other side of the ball. And Chase has played on both ends before, but his most productive season was just at right defensive end. So I think that, combined with maybe other teams being interested, and that's where the market kind of gets inflated. It's going to make it interesting, but I definitely think that he would be on the Bengals' radar for not only just all of that, but they were familiar with him in the draft process, and I think Burrow knows him as well from Ohio State, so it makes a lot of sense. So we'll just see kind of how that market kind of goes for him, I guess.
Yeah, so 2020 is a rookie listed at left defensive end. That's when he did have 7.5 sacks. He, they right defensive end. Later he had 5 sacks with Washington in 2023, and then 2.5. So equating when he was with San Francisco, and then like you said, I think last year in San Francisco they do all kinds of. They just he's listed as defensive line in San Francisco, not defensive end or edge or anything like that. So early, like you said, early in his career, there was some productivity at the left side, and he did play there in the NFL. With the injuries and stuff, that changed, and then obviously moved to San Francisco and that sort of thing, and so things changed a bit. But I mean, a guy, I don't know, maybe I'm not talking about hometown discount, but maybe there's some interest on his part coming back to the area from playing in Ohio State. It would have to make sense for the Bengals, and obviously we've talked about, I know a lot of people have talked about the guys that we mentioned one at the beginning of the show that they may need to move on from to shave some salary cap, get younger and potentially more productive at some of these spots. So a guy, again, low-hanging fruit because he's an Ohio State guy, former high pick. Oddly enough, was some fans wanted him over Joe Burrow when the Bengals were drafting that. Yeah, it's just like
Andrew Hawkins was a victim of that, believe it or not.
Yeah. So yeah, but we're not going to go down that road again. But regardless, a guy to monitor, $17 million a year is hefty. I don't know that he would necessarily get that, and I don't think the Bengals would pay that. But if for some reason he's one of those guys that falls through the cracks a little, I mean, you see those small handful of guys who go, wow, why didn't that guy get scooped up in free agency yet? As the days roll on, if he's one of those guys that falls through the cracks like that, maybe this is something that makes sense for the Bengals.
Yeah, it only takes. It takes one team to sign him to that deal, right? Whoever is like really in on him in that regard. But it is a deep edge rusher free agency class, so maybe it becomes like a buyer market in that sense. But yeah, it is a really tough position, I think, to find bargain bin values, because typically teams don't want to get rid of quality pass rushers, and when they do, like it's like, hey, we need pass rush help at any means necessary, and the ties like Trey Hendrickson are going to make $25-30 million a year, so value is relative, I guess. So Chase Young, he's definitely not going to get more than $18-20 million per year, but I think teams are going to see that former second overall pick, someone who's still in his mid-20s, coming off of a good year, and that's what's going to make him attractive. And maybe that would be like the big fish that the Bengals would spend along the defensive line, because it's either going to be that or defensive tackle for sure.
Yeah, and I'm just interested to see who the Bengals will be courting, and maybe this is one of those guys, we'll see. But a guy that could demand quite a bit on the open market, we'll see here. He's bounced around a bit, but I like you said, the age is really what's most intriguing to me. For when you could argue, even though he's entering his 6th season, that this is actually the prime of his career, 26 years old, right? I mean, you could make that argument. So we'll see what happens with Chase Young here. I've got another guy, though, John, for the this is a fun player. And yes, he is not a West Coaster, but a guy who plays in a school from the West, and a guy whose team made a surprising and fun run in college football this last year. A guy, I have no idea where this guy is going to end up in the draft. I just know I like him. And it could be a player that, it's a position the Bengals need, and it could be a player that could be one of those just spark plugs for a team. And we'll see if the Bengals would make such a move as this. But I am talking about the young man, Cam Skattebo, the running back from Arizona State. Let me tell you about this guy, John. Well, I've got a few clips for everybody here. This is just fun, and this is throwback. This is I'll tell you what I see. I see strength. I see balance. and I see toughness in a guy who just, like I said, a spark plug for a team. I don't know that the speed is there. I don't know that the long speed is there, but I do know he's versatile. I do know he's a team leader. 293 rushes, 1,711 yards, 5.7 yards per carry, 21 rushing TDs, 45 catches, 605 yards, and 3 touchdowns through the air last year. We'll play some fun clips here. Look at it. This is it. Balance, and staying on your feet through contact. A criticism of Bengals backs. Chase Brown did a good job of that. Look at this. Bengals have had some trouble at the goal line sometimes. Just head down, shoulders down. Look at this catch. You know, through the air here. You'll get another look at this. You know, just boom. You know, and gloveless, mind you. You got to love the gloveless. Nice cuts. Boom, goes through contact. Big play, still dragging a guy. And then this is a fun one here. Look at the dancing, look at the moves. And then let me just get through you here. And here's another shot of that. Just boom. I mean, that's stays. You saw the balance there to stay. And that comes with that kind of squattier frame. He's listed at 5'11", 216. I don't think he's 5'11", personally. I think that's not – I think that's being pretty generous. I just love this guy's style of play. It may not even be totally suitable to, the NFL. I see guys like Darren Sproles, not kickoff return stuff, but I just see the versatility and that smaller stature, making guys miss, staying on your feet, getting through contact. I see Jaylen Warren with that stocky frame and that strength to get through tackles. I see the versatility of like a Rex Burkhead, from a former Bengals back. I just see a lot of different things out of this guy. Some team could fall in love with him and pick him like round 2, round 3. Some team could say, as he didn't run well, or, it's a day 3 pick. I tend to think it's maybe more of the latter, but just a fun freaking player to watch, man. Fun player to watch. And he gets fired up. That's one of those guys that you like. He is older. He just turned 23 for a running back. But he did have another 1,700-yard rushing season in 22. So, I mean, the productivity's there as well. I think he missed some time last year, I think. But I just really like this kid. And he could be kind of a little bit more of the physical back the Bengals are looking for to complement Chase Brown.
When you said Rex Burkhead, I thought you were going to go to Brian Leonard too. Just continuing.
Brian Leonard. Yeah. Love me some Brian Leonard.
Continuing to scout the pigment, like Stone Cold Steve Austin in Longest Yard. That's how a white man wants to. No, but I love Skattebo because he did very Ashton Genty things against better teams typically, and he's projected to be drafted 2 rounds later. Like that's prime value, I think. And when you're talking about a position like running back where you have to maximize that value as much as you possibly can, that's what makes him intriguing. And he's going to be drafted later because, like you said, he's 2 years older than Genty. He's 23. He was a 6-year college player. He's not going to run very fast in the 40, which I think you kind of alluded to with those clips and how he doesn't have the long speed. I don't really care about that. I know for a fact that he has the metrics that support a long career in the NFL for a running back, despite the fact that he was in college for a long time. Because, I mean, it's just so refreshing to see someone who pops out on tape and is fun to watch on tape, but then the numbers do back it up. Like the missed tackles forced per the yards per carry, the yards per out run, the fact that he's going to be useful no matter what down distance it is, no matter where you are on the field. Like he can punch the ball in on the goal line, but he can Ray Rice it 4th and 29, through the air as a receiver. So there's nothing that he can't really do except maybe, beat Chase Brown in a track race, right? But that's why you have Chase Brown. He's your home run hitter in this offense. And I think if you were to draft Skattebo in the 3rd round, maybe you trade back in the 2nd and get like an extra 3rd round pick, whatever the case may be, in that late 3rd to 4th round range, like you wouldn't feel pressure necessarily to give one guy the lion's share of the touches or the other. I think it would be a great symbiotic 1-2 punch at running back. And again, just a guy that does pretty much everything extremely well. You need as many of those runners who can run through contact with that incredible balance and strength as much as possible, along with the soft hands. Like there's not a lot of boxes that Skattebo isn't going to check, but he's not going to be drafted into the 3rd round, which is why I think he should be on everyone's radar.
I just really you watch his clips and it's just fun. It's throwback, but it's also for a guy who's squattier and thicker, like I said, the balance through contact is really something that impresses me about him. We love Joe Mixon. He was one of the most productive backs in Bengals history. He did a lot of great things, but one of the big knocks with him is for how big and tall he was. When someone would clip at his ankles, right, he'd go down on first contact, right? This is not who this guy is. I mean, maybe it's the shorter frame, different running style, whatever you want to call it. The balance is there. The strength is there. And like I said, I think Ray Rice is another good comparison, despite Rice's off-field crap. Yeah. But I think as an on-field player, that's another good comparison, aside from some of the guys I mentioned too. I didn't really think about that, but that's another good one. I just really like this kid, and I could see someone, a bright offensive mind, maximizing his potential. I don't think he's like, Pro Bowl RB1, but I think you could use him, like you said, in a lot of different scenarios, a lot of different situations. He can have a solid career, and you can have a good role for him on your team.
I'll tell you this right now. He's one of the players that if he ends up in Kansas City, I'm going to be throwing stuff. I know, because you just know for a fact that would be a match. Just taking dump offs from Patrick Mahomes, a pissed off Patrick Mahomes after an embarrassing Super Bowl performance. He's someone that I would trade in front of Kansas City to take, I think.
Yeah, that's a great. Oh God, you just had to throw that one into the universe. Oh God. Well, that is this week's prospect profile and our free agent profile, a mini one on Chase Young, but a little bit more there. Go check out the highlights of Skattebo, man. It's minutes of fun to go check out his stuff. Go look at him. But a guy the Bengals could have on their radar. Let's get out of here. Let's drop the mic. We got through a lot today as we charge through the offseason. What do you got for us on our way out, John Sheeran?
Nothing much. There was some more minor news, I guess, relating to what Germaine Pratt, I think, is going through, because another player kind of in that similar spot is Geno Stone. And Geno Stone, like Germaine Pratt, is very active on social media, X, formerly known as Twitter. And he was talking to fans, I think it was last night. It was like some graph about like the worst free agent signing that each team had this past year. And Geno Stone was listed as the Bengals one. And, there was some defending Geno Stone as a player and how he kind of found his footing as the year went on. And he just flat out said, I think it was a response to Bengals captain. He said a lot more went into that regarding like the defensive changes and the schematic changes. But he said, quote, "No excuses next year. I'm back on my bleep." Bleep being the S word. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on this family program.
Yeah, whatever.
So I thought that was interesting, because you don't know, again, like what if these conversations has happened with players along the lines of Geno Stone, who I think many would have pegged as like a cap casualty. But I thought that was interesting as something of the long, if he either knows he's going to be back next year or if he doesn't know. But regardless of what it is, I think this past year was pretty troublesome for him, adjusting into a new environment, a new defense, and obviously all the troubles that the entire defense had as a whole. But then he kind of did find his footing in the past, in the final 5 games. And hopefully that is momentum for him. If he's in Cincinnati or if he's not, he's still really young. He's only 25 years old. And I think that's going to help him, I think, stick around in Cincinnati for another year if he's already had that conversation with Al Golden, because I think he has a lot better football ahead of him and a lot more reminiscent of how 2024 ended for him. So if that was him teasing that he is going to be back with the Bengals, I'm interested to see what Al Golden can get out of him in 2025.
Yeah, I am too. For a guy that was, pretty maligned throughout, he had 1 interception in the first Cleveland game, and then all of a sudden he had 3 towards the end of the season in 3 consecutive games, all wins: Dallas, Tennessee, Cleveland, one of which was a touchdown return against Tennessee. You started to see things go a different way for him, which is good. So hopefully he continues to grow. And there's, like you said, some of those things that you saw early in the season, hopefully Al Golden irons out those kinks and does so early so the Bengals don't get on another rough start to the season that we've become unfortunately accustomed to. But I don't have much else either. Go check out our fun interview with Trent Brown if you haven't already. That was a ton of fun. And go check out his the high quality meat packages he's got through his ranch, the Brown Ranch. That stuff, even though if you missed out on it on Super Bowl, you can still go get all kinds of stuff. Our thanks to Foco. Go check out that bobblehead we talked about, and the links in the description. Go get the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. Subscribe to that through your favorite audio streamer. And of course, keep it to both A to Z Sports, where John's killing it, and CincyJungle.com for all your Bengals news. And hey, keep it glued to us. We're going to keep rolling through the postseason on this show, as well as the rest of the Believe in Cincy podcast on the channel. Take care, John. Take care, everybody. We'll be back soon.